The title of the shir tonight is Kaddish for 11 months, always. Now, so what I want to explore tonight is what this source is for. We know that for a parent, when a person, God forbid, loses a parent, they have to recite Kaddish for 11 months. And I get a lot of questions about this, calculating the date of when's my last date of Kaddish. There are a couple of questions that we have to ask. What is the source for this? Why is it 11 months? Why is it not 12 months? Another question is, does this apply in all situations? And another question is, what if I'm saying Kaddish for someone who doesn't have sons, who's not a parent? Does the law of 11 months also apply? And we'll see, along the course of this discussion, some fascinating ideas. I want to also acknowledge a couple of things. One is that one of the impetuses for this shir was that someone came over to me and said, Rabbi, I heard that if a person's parent was not Shomer Shabbos, that you should say Kaddish for 12 months for them. And I said, what? I can't believe it. I said, I never heard of such a thing. But as it turns out, Rav Moshe says that, so we're going to see that tonight. And another thing that I came across is a chaver of mine that I saw at the RCA convention over the summer. Rabbi Usher Bush is a very big Talmud Chacham, and he gave me his sefer, and his sefer deals with the issue of what to do when you're saying Kaddish for someone who's not a parent, who doesn't have sons to say Kaddish, and you've been elected to say Kaddish. Let's say it's a grandfather, and it's like your maternal grandfather, and who only had daughters, and you've been elected to say Kaddish. Or for some other situation, a family member who didn't have any from children, and you've been elected to say Kaddish. When does the law of 11 months apply and when does it not? So we'll see a lot of this as we go along, and some really interesting stuff too. The halacha it finds its origin in Siman Shinayin Vav in Yoredeya, which deals with Hilchos Avelus, and there's a very long Ramah who launches into a number of different practices of Avelus, including the Kaddish. It's a fascinating Ramah, which is the source of a lot of our minhagim, but we're only going to take a very small extract of that Ramah to take a look at something interesting. The Ramah, it would seems to be contradicting himself from the beginning to the end of this very long section. He writes, "V'nimsa b'midrasho slomar Kaddish al-av." It's brought in the Medrash that a person should say Kaddish for a parent, for a father, but that really means a parent. Al-kein nohagu lomer al-av va'em Kaddish basra yud beis chodesh. And therefore there's a custom to award the last Kaddish of davening to a person who is in Avelus for the 12 months. And the person should say Kaddish for 12 months. Now this, of course, most of you are aware that the original practice of saying Kaddish was not that we all say Kaddish together, although it eventually did evolve into that practice. The original practice was that one person says Kaddish, so that we can carefully pay our attention to that one individual, and that different people would take turns as who would say Kaddish. And when you were dealing with a smaller size minyan, many times it would be one avel, two avelim. So the custom would be to award the last Kaddish to the person who was in the Yud Beis Chodesh. And sometimes you'd have to rotate. Many minyanim still have that practice today. In various different communities, they only allow Kaddish to be said by one person, and so therefore you have to rotate, and sometimes you only get to say therefore one Kaddish a day or one Kaddish per tefillah. So v'chein nohagu lahaftir b'navi u'lehispalel arvis b'motzoi shabbosos. Similarly, he says it is customary to get the haftorah, and this again he's talking about on a constant basis during the year of Avelus. In other words, chaparayim as much as you can to get the haftorah, and also to daven ma'ariv motzoi Shabbos, shehu hazman shechozrin haneshamos legehinom, because this is the time when the neshamos go back to Gehenna. And as we know, ucheshahabein mispalel umakadesh berabim hoda aviv v'imo min hagehinom, that the purpose of davening for the Amud is to help redeem a parent from Gehenna through sanctifying their name. So if I, as a vestige of my parent, davens for the Amud, recites Kaddish by being Makadesh Shem Hashem, and davens especially Motzoi Shabbos for the Amud, as a parent is returning back to Gehenna, that helps save the parent from I guess the heat and the pain of Gehenna. Not that they're not going to go back to Gehenna, but that it'll lessen the blow to some degree. Okay? And the question that you may want to ask yourself is it a correct practice, therefore, that when I have a yard site, many years later, many people have the minhag to take the Amud, the Motzai Shabbos, before the yard site? Is that a correct practice based upon what the Ramah tells us now, that the purpose of davening Motzai Shabbos is to lessen the blow as the decedent goes back to Gehenna? So, is that right? So what if it's 10 years after a parent has left this world? So don't we have to assume that no longer are they suffering in Gehenna? So why then would it be appropriate to take the Amud that Motzai Shabbos? And yet we'll see that this is a machlokas haposkim as to whether it is appropriate or inappropriate for a person to take the Amud Motzai Shabbos before a yard site, based on this on what this Ramah says. Now we're skipping a big chunk of the Ramah, and then we're going now to the last part of the Ramah over here. So by the way, this whole idea that on Shabbos there's respite from Gehenna, you see that also. That's one of the reasons why we say Vihi Noam on Motzai Shabbos. It is words of Tanchumim, it's words of consolation to those neshamas that are returning back to Gehenna. And presumably it's only those people who during their lifetime were Shabbos observant get this respite from Gehenna on Shabbos because of the special protective schus that they have for having been Shomer Shabbos in their lifetimes. V'ha'avelim omrim Kaddish afilu b'Shabbos v'Yom Tov. Okay, so this is very clear from our practices that an Avel recites Kaddish on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Aval lo nahagu lehispalel b'Shabbos v'Yom Tov. But in Avel, the minhag is not to take the Amud, not to lead the davening on Shabbos and Yom Tov. This is all from the Maharil. And Afal Pi Shein Isser B'Davar, even though it's not prohibited, but it's still the practice not to do it. Aval B'Yamos HaChol, but during the weekday, Misha Yodea Lihispalel, if a person does have the skill to be able to act as the Shliach Tzibor, Yispalel, he should lead the davening. V'Yoser Moel Mikadish Yosam Shalom Iskan Eloketanim. And not only that, but davening for the Amud is even more efficacious for the decedent than reciting Kaddish. Because reciting Kaddish was instituted for children. And that's not something, leading the Amud, leading the davening is not something that a child can do. But to be Makadeh Shem Hashem Barabim as the leader, that has more efficacy than even saying Kaddish, according to says the Ramah. And so many of you are also familiar with the idea that sometimes we divide up the davening. We let the Shliach Tzibur go until after Tachanun, and then we let someone else take over after the Kaddish after Shemona Esrei. And that's sometimes is done just to break it up so that we have two people, and sometimes it can be done for, let's say, a person has the skill to lead, but only to a limited extent. We give him the end of davening to lead to us, that he has somewhat of the schus of leading the davening. And then this last part is v'nagu shein omrim kaddish u'tefila rak yud aleph chadashim. And the minhag is that we only say Kaddish and lead the davening for 11 months. Kidei shelo ya'asu avihem v'imam rishayim ki mishpat rasha yud beis chodesh. The purpose of only saying Kaddish for 11 months is so as not to portray one's parents as wicked people. Because Chazal tell us that the judgment against the wicked is 12 months in Gehenna. So on the one hand, we want to be able to save our parents from a judgment in Gehenna. But on the other hand, we don't want to portray them as Rishayim, as requiring the full 12 months. So therefore we say Kaddish for 11 months. It's almost like you're, pardon the pun, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. Right? Because on the one hand, saying Kaddish implies, okay, my father and mother is in Gehenna now, I have to provide them with some zuchus. And on the other hand, it's not appropriate to suggest that they need to cook the full time, So therefore, let me say only 11 months, and so that will sort of alleviate some of the suggestion that they're in Gehenna. Yeah?
How do we get to the assumption that everybody goes to Gehenna?
Well, it's brought down in the Sfarim that everyone goes to Gehenna. A person, it's like a zuchus almost to go to Gehenna, because Gehenna is portrayed as a purgatory, as a place where a person's imperfections are purged. So, there's a famous sefer, I think it's called, from the Vilna Gaon, I think it's called Evan Shalema, or I think it's called Evan Shlomo. It's based on the pasuk of Evan Shalema. And he goes through a lot of different practices of what happens he talks about that tzaddikim are just dipped into Gehenna and then are pulled right out. And Beinonim have to linger up to 11 months, and Rishonim go for a full 12 months. If a person doesn't have the zchus to go to Gehenna, then there are other punishments which are far worse than Gehenna. So Gehenna is the purgatory status of the afterlife. What? Yeah, there are Gemaras that talk about it as well. I just don't remember them offhand. Okay, now you might have noticed, especially because I underscored them, is that the Ramah seems to be soiser himself. At the first part of the Ramah that we read, he says that the custom is to say Kaddish for 12 months. And then at the end he says, no, only say Kaddish for 11 months. So this is a kasha that many of the Achronim ask on the Ramah, like what does he really mean? Is it 12 months or 11 months? So one tshuva that discusses this is from Rav Vosner in the Shevet HaLevi, and he says, Vasher Shal B'Lashon HaRamah. And source number 2, he says, Al Keinad B'Lomar Al Aviv Ve'im Kaddish B'Asr Yud Chodesh V'Shuv B'Sof Devar Kosav HaRamah B'Nogin She'enom Kaddish V'Tfilah Rak Yud Aleph Chadashim Kedei Shelo Yasu Aviyim V'Imam Rishoyim. So he says, how do you reconcile this? He says, V'chi Tema Ra'a Ez Estira. Oh, I'm sorry, Uchvot Tarasu rather. Ra'a Ez Estira Mitchilas Divrei HaRamah Shekosav Yud Beis Chodesh. He says, so this seems to be a stira. So he says, Lo Kashamidi. It's not a problem at all. He says, the Tchilas Divrei Harma Hainu Minhag Me'ikar Hadin Al Pi Chazal, the Mishpat Rishoyim Begehem Yud Beis Chodesh. He says the first part of the Ramah is just mentioning that what would be appropriate if you needed to save a parent from Gehenna for 12 months, because that's the judgment of Rishoyim and Gehenna. So therefore, what would be appropriate for a parent, even if they were the worst parent, is to say Kaddish for 12 months. And then later on, the poskim innovated the idea that you should diminish that amount by 1 month in order to not portray your parents as Rishoyim. V'nafkamina lahalacha gam l'divan al pi masha kosem v'schei tshuva u'v'tshuvas chasem soifer v'odi iko fanim diyesh lahagid yud beis chodesh mamish v'hadvarim pshutim. He says the nafkamina is that which the Pischei Tshuva writes, that sometimes it is going to fall out that you will say a Kaddish for a full 12 months. And what Pischei Tshuva is he referring to? So that's source number 3. The Pischei Tshuva says, bringing from a sefer called Chamos Yerushalayim, Shekosav Demisha Yodeya Ba'av V'imo Shahayu Rishoyim Me'osam Shenidanim Yud Beis Chodesh Ra'oi U'mechuyav Sheyomar Kaddish Yud Beis Chodesh Ayin Sham. That if you know my parents were evil people, so then you should say Kaddish for 12 months for them. Because, okay, that's one thing to imply that my parents were Rishoyim, but if they need it, they need my help. Because, it could be that, they were pretty lousy people, and if they were lousy people, then that's the least I can do for them, is to help them for the full 12 months, because they taka need it.
12 months enough?
I don't know. I don't know your parents. But
is there 1 month difference between the tzaddik and the rasha?
Well, it seems like not. It seems like there's shades here. There's shades here, and you want to be able to provide as much protective power as you can. So I say it's like a delicate balance. You want to provide as much as you can zchus of being makadesh shem shamayim for as long as you can. But you want to minimize it so that you're not implying that they're a Russia. So it's almost like with one hand you're makarev b'yamin v'docha b'smol. It's like you have to try and find that very, very careful balance. So if you know your parents were Rishoyim, so then you should say Kaddish for 12 months. Now there are certain situations where a parent is so evil that they don't even have the zchus to have someone say Kaddish. For example, the tshuva that Rav Vosner is referring to from the Chassam Sofer talks about a person who's ma'abed atzmo l'das, who commits suicide. And there the question is, do you say Kaddish for a person who knowingly commits suicide? So the Chassam Sofer goes through a whole discussion of, well, was the person mentally ill? Did he fit the criteria of a person who out of evil committed suicide, or was it out of simply mental illness or depression and so forth? But then he says, even if you could ascertain that such a person really did it out of a malice, like rebelling against the Ribono Shel Olam, and therefore committed suicide, he still thinks that you should recite Kaddish for the person, but you should say it for a full 12 months, because then the person was doing an act of evil. But in the course of that discussion, he does portray that there are even very extreme situations where a person was a chayte umachdias harabim, where he was sinned and he led others to sin, like Chizkiyahu HaMelech's father, who dragged his father's remains through the street as a sign of great disgracing of his father's remains, so that people should see what happens to sinners, that in really, really extreme cases, you wouldn't even say Kaddish for such a person, because they don't deserve this chus, right? So again, we're talking about most people. Anyway, so this leads to the tshuva in Rav Moshe. This is one of the more later tshuvas from Moshe, which also it sort of shocked me when I read it. This is in Yoredeya Chelik Dalet. It's in source number 4. Siman Samach Aleph in the Igros, where the question is presented: Im lomar Kaddish Yud Beis Chodesh Achar Av Shahaya Mechalel Shabbos, V'im lomar Kaddish Klal Achar Av Shahaya Kofer. Should you say Kaddish for 12 months for a father who was a Mechalel Shabbos? And should you recite Kaddish at all for a parent who was a heretic? Meaning, not only was he a Mechalel Shabbos, because a lot of people just don't do the mitzvahs because they don't want to. But what about a person who Bishita was a Kofer? In other words, this was his theology, that he was a true atheist. Okay? So Rav Moshe writes as follows. He says, Av shavadai haya'adif lomar Kaddish kol yud beis chodesh. He says, really, for every person, it would be better to say Kaddish for 12 months to give the parents the most protective power you can lend. Aval kvar kasav harama yordeas of siman shemayim vav dinagu shein omrim Kaddish rak yud alav chadashim. Kidei shelo yasu avihem v'imam rishayim ayin sham. So that we don't portray our parents as being rishayim. Okay. Shalachein pashat shehu bistam inshi sheyodim l'sheyaduin l'shomrei Torah. He says, therefore, this halacha is in reference to most people, that it is known that they were observers of the Torah. They were observant Jews. Aval kisheyadua lahabein shelo hayu shomrei Torah dahavi machalolei shabbasos. But when the son knows that his parents were not observant, let's say they were machalol Shabbos, av shahaya rak leparnasaso v'lo l'sha'ar devarim. Even if the parent was only a Machalol Shabbos out of a weakness because he needed to support his family, right? As did many Jews who came from Europe and felt compelled to daven Hashkama. You know, the original Hashkama minyan was not for people who wanted to learn afterwards or to go to a shir. The original Hashkama minyan was for people who needed to go to work afterwards and felt this devotion to Tefillah and to Shabbos, but at the same time felt a devotion to their families. And Nebuch, they had to be Machalol Shabbos. But he says, even if it's only for Parnasa, Yesh lo lomer Kaddish kol hayud beis chodesh. He should say Kaddish for all 12 months. I almost fell off my seat when I saw this tshuva. But let us continue. And my question to Rav Moshe, I wish he were alive for me to ask. And perhaps if he were alive today, maybe he would have a different answer. This was written in the late 70s, early 80s. But the question that I would ask him is, Rav Moshe, does this apply to a Tinok Shenishma? What about, all of the other times when we say that a person should not be condemned or judged for the fact that they're not observant because of their lack of upbringing? And you clearly see that Rav Moshe, at least from the context that he's writing, is referring to a person who knows about Shabbos and, for work reasons, did not observe Shabbos. But what about a person who was completely didn't come from the old country and was raised in America or in Canada and just has no knowledge of Shabbos or no appreciation of Shabbos? I don't know. I would like to think that Rav Moshe was not addressing those kinds of people. The kol shekain kishahaya mechalolei Shabbos gam l'sharin yanim afrak l'te'avon sheyesh lo lomar kol hayud beis chodesh. And surely if the person was Machal Shabbos Tamazoi, not just because he had to go to work, but because he liked to go to the mall and he liked to go to the sports games and things like that, and it's just L'tei Avon, and just because he's a glutton for enjoyment and therefore doesn't want to observe Shabbos, therefore you would have to say Kaddish for 12 months. But if mamish, a person was an apikairis and he was Machal Shabbos because the Shita, he held that there's no such thing as Shabbos, there's no God, and so forth. She'ein misablim alav, and for such a person, you don't even sit shiva. So again, this is all from our practices of old, where people know what the score is, and they still choose to go against it. Lo shayach lechayev lahabein lomar kaddish im meis al mitaso. Then, if the parent dies of natural causes, we should not obligate the child to say Kaddish. He doesn't say that it's usur. He says that you don't have an obligation to say Kaddish if the parent dies of natural causes. However, v'im neherag, but if he is murdered, af mumar gamor ha'isa b'ramah sham sha'omrim Kaddish. There the Ramah writes that you should say Kaddish because there the fact that he was murdered means that he's receiving a divine retribution, which is going to act as an atonement for him. That in itself is part of his atonement. And therefore, there's hope, there's redemption for that person after death, and therefore you should say Kaddish.
You don't mean specifically murder, you mean died accidentally also, or whatever is wrong.
No, he writes Neherag. He says murdered. Now, we'd have to look carefully at that halacha. He says, Sham berama isa shenerag biyad akum. That if he's murdered by some kind of a criminal, an akum, a heathen, right? So therefore there's certain simanim that indicate that this person was receiving some kind of bizarre divine retribution, I mean, look, it could also be that if he is in a freak accident, maybe that would also be a sign. It's not clear. Aval im ratza lomar kaddish al aviv shay mechal Shabbos machmas kfir u'meis al mitaso mistaber shirashai. If he wants to say Kaddish for a father who was a kofar, who was a heretic, even when he died of natural causes, then there is some rationale. We certainly can allow that person to say Kaddish. We're not going to deny him the opportunity if that's what he wants to do. Deben shuhu tzaddik hahu moil afla aviv shuhu rasha gamor. He says because when a son is righteous, he helps to redeem the soul of a parent even when the parent is a complete rasha. So that's why the two idolatrous kings, Achaz and Ammon, even though they were clearly idolatrous as portrayed in Scripture, nevertheless the Mishnah does not describe them as people who lose their share in the world to come because their righteous sons were able to redeem their souls. This is obviously, we can't really compare ourselves to their kind of evil because of, there was a unique generation and so forth, and you can't really compare yourself to an idolatrous king of the past. But at least you see an example of children who were able to redeem their parents even when the parents were Ovdei Avodah Zarah. Harei vaday shegam ma'asim tovim debanim yirei Hashem v'shomrei Torah shebizmanenu nami yo'ilu b'ma'aseim hatovim uv'amiras kaddish u'kedusha u'baruchu sheyomru alayhu. Then undoubtedly the Kaddish and the davening and everything else that children who are righteous and observant do for their parents who were kofrim shall certainly be of help. Ubevada yesh lahaben l'ratzos lahotzi or lirtzos lahotzi es aviv megehenim v'shiyelo chelek l'olam haba. And surely every child would want to redeem a parent and make sure that they receive a portion of the world to come and pull them out of Gehenim. Afim yitukan rak b'meshach hasman, even if that rectification takes a little bit longer. Ach shelo yachol lidchos avelam acherim ach shehem achar shloshim v'hu b'soch shloshim. But here he says, Rav Moshe, another huge chiddush. If I know that my parent was a kofar, since I'm putter from saying Kaddish, but it's my option if I want to, I don't have a right to be counted as part of the rotation in order to displace someone else who was saying Kaddish for a righteous parent. Wow, what a huge chiddush. So in other words, according to what he's saying is, if a guy is part of a big shul and we all take turns davening for the Amud, or saying Kaddish. If there's only one person at a time saying Kaddish, I have a right to go over to my to the other guy saying Kaddish. Hey, I knew your father. Your father was a kaifer. You don't get a chance. I'm not going to give up my amud so that you can daven for your father, the kaifer. I mean, this, of course, on a practical basis, it would become extremely tenuous, and would probably lead to some machlokes. So I would say, don't try this at home, as they say. You know? And so I have to say that that it's difficult. It's difficult to digest this. It's difficult to process this. And it seems somewhat, this tshuva, even though it's only written perhaps 40 years ago, or even a little bit less than 40 years ago, it definitely, there's a certain foreign ring to it because of our attitudes towards people who are not from today. And I don't think that I could, in good conscience, ever counsel a person who comes to me and says, Rabbi, my parent was not Shomer Shabbos. Do I say Kaddish for 11 months or 12 months? I don't think that I could, in good conscience, tell them to say Kaddish for the full 12 months. If they say to me, well, in these unusual circumstances, my parent was from at one time, then he became an atheist, and he decided to throw it all away, but he learned in Panovich, in the 30s or the 40s, right? And then he threw it all away. Then I would say, well, listen, if you think that your parent was really a rush, and he beat me, and then he molested a kid, and like you think of all the worst possible things that you can think of, then I would say, okay, 12 months for you. It's but unless I really had that information that really portrayed the parent as really a dastardly individual, I don't know that I could, in good conscience, counsel someone to say Kaddish for a full 12 months.
When you get to that point, they're not obligated to say Kaddish.
Right. So again, you have three levels, as Rabbi Ostreicher correctly points out. You have three madregas. One is for a person who was from all their life, presumed to be a good person, a righteous person, a frum person, 11 months. Then you have a person who's a rasha, but was only a rasha because a mumar l'tei avon, was really like a person who, out of weakness of character, they were not frum. Not out of a theological heresy. Right? So then 12 months. And then you have the third madrega, which is like a real mumar lahachis, like a kaifer, not bikaires. That person you're putter and gansen from reciting Kaddish for, but he can if you want, as long as you don't displace somebody else. Those are the three madregas that Rav Moshe portrays. And again, I contend that it's difficult to ascertain the latter two categories in light of the lack of really good education in the last couple of generations. Okay.
Is this discussion strictly restricted to Kaddish or other aspects of Avelut?
Well, as you notice, Rav Moshe alluded to the fact that for a person who is truly a kofer, a Rasha Gamor, you don't even sit shiva for. But that's outside of our conversation for now. That's maybe another topic.
Rely on the idea that they might have done tshuva at the last moment. We can't know that.
Okay. Again, we'll have to analyze that sugya more in depth as far as the laws of avelus. But here we're talking about Kaddish now. Okay.
Is that a son or a father?
What's that?
Is that a son or a father? In other words,
I don't hear what you're saying.
A son or a father, not sitting shiva for it. So just don't have to keep it up and somebody's a Russia and
No. That's the whole point. There is no kibbut of the aim for a Rasha Gomor. That's why we see that Yechizkiyahu dragged his father's remains to the streets. Okay. Source number five. Yalkut Yosef by Rav Yitzchak Yosef, the son of Rav Avaji Yosef. Is that the current chief rabbi, or is this one of his brothers? What's the name of the current Sephardic chief rabbi? Is that Yitzchak? So this is then the current chief rabbi. Current chief rabbi's Sefer Yalkut Yosef on Halachas Psuki de Zimra. We're going to see really a footnote in his Ha'aros. And even what we're going to discover that Sephardim have a slightly different approach to this whole idea of 11 months. They go into the 12th month, and even among the Sephardim, there's differences of opinion whether you say 11 months in a week or 11 months in 3 weeks. And along the way, we'll see some interesting points from Rav Yosef. Mi sheniftar aviv imo, Omer Kaddish kol Yud Beis Chodesh, Ach b'shavua harishon shel Chodesh hashnemasar, but in the first week of the 12th month, Posek lomar Kaddish b'meshach shavua. Then you stop saying Kaddish during that week, I guess towards the end of the week. V'Kaddish al Yisrael, Kaddish al Yisrael, shachar halimud ein tzarich lahafsik milomer. But the Kaddish de Rabbanan that you say after learning, then even in the 12th month you recite that. Al Yisrael val Rabbanan. He says there's nothing wrong if it's your 12th month. You can say that Kaddish for your parent. Why? And it's for a very simple reason, because since other people say that Kaddish of Al Yisrael, not just Avelim, he says that's the reason why it's okay for you to say it, because it's not recognizable that you're saying it dafka for a parent who was nifter. Now, that could be only according to the Sephardic custom, where other people, other than an Avil, says the Kaddish de Rabbanan. But in our circles, I don't think that we would paskin this way. V'chozel omer Kaddish at siyum yom pekudas hashana, and then you, just during that week, you stop saying Kaddish, and then you commence saying Kaddish until the year is over. So it's a very interesting kind of custom. You stop in the first week of the 12th month, and then you finish it off for the rest of the week. So in the Ha'aros he writes as follows: Lahafsik lomar Kaddish b'shavua harishon shel chodesh hayud beis. Yalkut Yosef al Hilchos Avelus, he says, see my other sefer on Hilchos Avelus, Urei b'din zeh b'kaf hachayim, v'hatam shemafsikim lomar Kaddish b'shavua harishon shel chodesh hashneim asar. The reason why the Sephardic tradition is to stop saying Kaddish only during the first week of the 12th month, hu kedei shelo yasu es avim v'imam rishoim. Like the Ramah had said, Ki mishpat rishoim begehenim shnei masar chodesh, because the judgment is for 12 months for Rasha. Va'al yedei zeh sheyodunu oso lemate lekav zuchus, hu kaldino lemaila. So listen to what he says. He says, by us giving our parents the benefit of the doubt and stopping to say Kaddish early, thereby suggesting that they were not rishoim who deserved 12 months in Gehenna, that in effect alleviates their judgment up above. In other words, it's not just an issue of maris ayin, I don't want to portray a parent as being a bad person, but by demonstrating that my parent was not a bad person and stopping to say Kaddish early, I'm also triggering a divine reaction in heaven to alleviate their suffering in Gehenna. Now how does that work? So he explains as follows. That when a person is nifter, says the Medrash, God turns to the angels and he says to them, L'chu lemata ure'u maha brios omrim olav. God says to the malachim, go down and listen to what people are saying about this person. Kosher haya, yirei shamayim haya. Was he a kosher person? Was he a God-fearing person? Miyad mitaso parachas be'avir. If people say that about him, so then his casket immediately flies up into the air. Meaning, in the spiritual sense, his neshama goes up to Shamayim. In other words, that's one of the reasons, by the way, to say a hesped for someone, because by saying true words of eulogy over a person, depicting them as a good person, the malachim are listening to that, and by them listening, they convey that information to Hashem, and that lessens the judgment in Shamayim. What's bad, of course, is if you say falsehoods at a hesped. Then you can really get in trouble, because then it's like claiming something that you don't have a right to claim on your taxes, right? Mm-hmm. Then you're going to get audited, right? If you get audited in Shamayim, then things could be much worse for you. So you have to make sure. That's why the poskim say words of eulogy for a person, but you're not allowed to exaggerate or say anything that's untrue, because otherwise you're going to arouse scrutiny from Shamayim, and then you can get the person in trouble. But on the other hand, it's virtuous to say true words of hesped for a person, because Shamayim is listening, and that will help alleviate their judgment. So therefore, by stopping in the middle of the 12th month to say Kaddish, you're actually saying something. You're acknowledging in this world, my parents, my father, my mother, they were good people. They don't deserve a full judgment of Gehenna for 12 months. And that actually triggers an alleviation of the judgment. So, which is a big chiddush also. V'ayin b'knesses hagdola shehinig lomer kaddish yud beis chodesh chasr shavu echad. He says the Knesses Hagdola had a different minhag. He said Kaddish for the 11 months and 3 weeks. He stopped 1 week early. The Chain Kosav, the Birkei Yosef, the Kosav B'Shailas Tshuvas Beis Hayot, the Shekenag Hagon HaChasim Sofer. The Chain Kosav the Ben Ishchai. The Hagam Shaharav Sham Kosav, the Poskim Lomar Kaddish B'Shavua HaAcharon Shel Chodesh Achadasar, Lo Ichpat Lan Shezeh HaKol Shaveh. He says, even though the Ben Ishchai writes that you stop saying Kaddish at the end of the last week of the 11th month, it doesn't really make a difference whether you stop at the 11th month or you stop into the 12th month. As long as you stop short of a full 12 months, that's the idea. V'chol zehu lipsok min hakadishim she'omrim hayesomim hein kaddish basra v'hein sha'ar kadishim shehaminag shahayesomim omer moso. He says that's only as far as the kaddish that a yasam says. But he says, but the Kaddish that everyone says, like if I'm davening for the Yamud, then of course I can say Kaddish. In the minhag of Sfardim, apparently, I was not aware of this, but the minhag of Sfardim is that anyone can say the Kaddish de Rabbanan. And that's why a person, a Sfardi, can say the Kaddish de Rabbanan in the 12th month, because it's not clearly recognizable that he's doing it for a parent. Okay? That's what. So the big thing that I wanted to point out from Rav Yitzchak Yosef's tshuva is that stopping to say Kaddish early is not only a portrayal, but it's actually a trigger to do something real in Shammai. We go to the Gesher HaChaim from Rav Tukachinsky, the very famous sefer on minhagim and halachos of Avelus based on the minhagim of Yerushalayim, and he writes as follows in Chelek Aleph Perak Lamed. Source number 7. He writes, Gimel, he says, V'hayaroi sheyomer haben Kaddish yud beis chodesh shalemim, the mishpat rishon yud beis chodesh, because the mishpat, the judgment of Rishon is 12 months, the chol yud beis chodesh gufo kaim v'nishmaso ola v'yoredis. He says, as we know, the Gemara says that for 12 months the body remains intact and the soul is constantly going up and then comes down on Shabbos. Finally, when the body completely decomposes, the soul goes up to Shemayim permanently. Like the Ramah had said, you should not even add 1 day into the 12th month. Because even just adding 1 day into the 12th month is as if you said it for the full 12 months. Not like the Sfardim, who go into the 12 months. So you see that there's differences, very clear differences. And therefore he goes through it. He says, Kagon imeis v'nikvar cheshvan yomer kaddish ad zayin tishrei va'ad bichlal. So therefore he says that if the day of the Petira was on the 8th of Cheshvan, then your last day of Kaddish would be Zayin Tishrei. You understand? It's not that you go until Ches Tishrei. You go until Zayin Tishrei, so you've said it a full 11 months, but not going into the 12th month. You wouldn't say it anymore. He says, he says there are other minhagim that they say 12 months minus a week, which was also quoted in the name of the Knesset Hagdolah by Rav Yitzchak Yosef. And he says, therefore, it turns out, like this year, if a person were to die in Cheshvan, right? So then you wouldn't say Kaddish until Tishrei, you'd rather say Kaddish until Elul, because you have to count the 2 Adars. Because remember, the criterion is not the calendar year, the criterion is the 12 months of judgment in Gehenna, which is independent of whether it's a leap year or a non-leap year. And then he goes into Kaddish de Rabbanan, and if we skip to Ostalid, and here we get into another issue, and this issue is V'Rabim Noagim Shalav Davka Habein Ela Acher HaOmer Kaddish LaAliyas Nishmas Meis Omer Alav Gamhu Rak Yud Aleph Chodesh. That this is not just for a child, for a parent to say Kaddish only for 11 months, but if you're saying Kaddish for a person who has no one else to say Kaddish, whether you're being paid to do that, let's say this is your parnasa, this is one of the things you do for a living, is that you're a Kaddish Zogger, right, for people who need Kaddish to be recited, or you're doing it for another family member, also only 11 months. Umuvan she'ish acher zulas habein yochol omer gam yud beis chodesh. But he says, if you're not a different person other than the son, could say Kaddish for a full 12 months. V'kach roi linhog she'im acher omer HaKaddish bein b'chinam u'bein b'schar yom yud beis chodesh. So the Gesher HaChaim paskins that if you're not a son, there's no mitzvah of kibbut av va'em anymore. There's no mitzvah of kibbut av va'em to portray your parent as a good person, because this was not my parent. It was my Uncle Charlie. And my Uncle Charlie, I don't have a mitzvah of kibbut av va'em. Or it's the guy they paid my, some money. They gave me tzedakah so that I could say Kaddish for them. I have no mitzvah of kibbut av va'em for that person. So therefore, why not give them the full benefit of protection? It's like, you paid for it a 12-month policy. Let's give you the full 12 months. Extended warranty, right? So why not? Now, there's no isser of my portraying them in a negative light, because I don't have that chiyuv of a kibbut av va'em. So therefore, for someone I'm not related to, who's not my parent, I can say Kaddish for the full 12 months, and that's actually the proper thing to do in the eyes of the Gesher HaChaim. Okay.
But isn't the Indian of being a Russia not necessarily just av va'em?
No, it's a din of kibbut av va'em. There's a din of kibbut av va'em that I should portray my parents in a positive light in order to show them proper honor. So I don't have that mitzvah, even if, as a byproduct of my giving them the full extended warranty, I portray them possibly as needing it, but at least I'm covering all my bases. It's a special din in kibbut av va'em to only say 11 months, says the Gesher HaChaim. Okay? Comes along the Kolbo al Avelus. Now the Kolbo al Avelus is an indispensable sefer, even though there are many other Sfarim, but every Rav needs to have a Kolbo al Avelus in his library. It was written by a Rabbi Greenwald, who was the Rav in Columbus, like 2 generations ago, like one of the old-time Europeisha Rabbanim who came to Middle America, was a huge Gaon of a Talmud Chacham, and settled in Columbus, and that's where he made his career. I actually met his son at a Pesach program, and I developed a friendship with his son, and he told me, my father was Rabbi Greenwald, the famous Rabbi Greenwald from Columbus, who wrote the Kolbo on Avelos, and every Rav in America has this sefer. And so that was very interesting. But the Kolbo writes a lot of very interesting minhagim, and he writes that in source number 8, he says, Umi shomer Kaddish bischar, o afilu b'chinam ba'ad krovo, im gam heim yomer yud alav chodesh, o dafka bebanim alavosam, yesh chashash lo yechasku osam l'rishoyim. He says, as far as this question is concerned, is a non-child, do they say Kaddish for 11 months or 12 months? Ayin b'ma'oros nasan simen nun dalet shigam heim omrim rak yud alav chodesh. He says, take a look at this sefer Ma'oros Nasan. And he says that you should still say it only 11 months, even if it's not apparent. So this is different from the Gesher HaChaim. So I was saying to myself, who is this Ma'oros Nasan? Probably was a contemporary of Rabbi Greenwald. He was a Rav in Lvov in the 80 years ago, was when this tshuva was written. And it's a fascinating tshuva. And there's just such interesting stuff in this tshuva that I wanted to learn it together with you. Let's take a look. It's in source number 9. It's from Harav Nasan Nata Leiter from Lvov, and he writes this tshuva in Tafresh Tzadi Beis, which is like like the 1920s, I guess, or maybe the early 30s. 1932, is it?
How do you get hold of the second?
HebrewBooks.org.
Free.
It's free. It's online. Everyone has access to every single sefer that was ever written, kimat. And there's no excuse for not knowing where to find something now. You can find everything anytime, 24 hours. Okay, so he writes as follows. By the way, sometimes it's not so easy. You have to do a little snooping around because there's like 7 different svarim called Ma'oros Nasan by different authors at different times. So you have to figure out like which one it is, and you figure it out eventually. Okay, Nistapakti. So I have the following safek. He says, Ha'omer Kaddish b'shvel shar karovav, ha'im yachol omer Kaddish yud beis chodesh. If you're saying Kaddish for another relative, that's not a parent. Can you say Kaddish for 12 months? Achar debarama kasav hatam shelo yomer Kaddish rak yud alav chodesh shelo yasa aviv v'imo rishayim. He says it's only because of kibbut av va'em. Haloshen yored mishum kibbut av va'em naguba. Ulefi ze ba'acherim shapir nachon. Then for other people it would be proper to say the full 12 months. Va'al kol panim rashayim o meyud beis chodesh. It should at least be permitted to say for 12 months. The ilu haya niftar me'oso de mishpatim begenem yud beis chodesh. He says, what if the person taka needed it? Wouldn't you want to give it to a soul that needed the protection of 12 months of Kaddish? Why deny him, right? If there's no problem, if there's no reason to deny him, why deny him? He says, therefore, the only people you wouldn't be allowed to say would be a parent or an elder brother, where there's also mitzvah kibbut av va'em. The Gemara learns from the verbiage of the pasuk by kibbut av va'em that it includes your older brother, but other people, why not? He says, v'lich ora, yesh lomar tegam al acherim ein nachon lomar yud beis chodesh. He says, it would seem to me that even for other people that are not a parent or an older brother, you still should only say 11 months. He says, the amru zal hevidanis kol ha'adam lekaf schus. Because you're supposed to judge people, give people the benefit of the doubt. So on that side, there's an argument to be made that why should I assume the guy needs 12 months? Let me be done also lekaf schus. Give him the benefit of the doubt that he was a good guy and he doesn't need the full 12 months. The Chol Yisrael b'chezkas kashrus. He says every Jew has an assumption of being a proper good person. Im kol zeh, but on the other hand, yesh lomar mi yos tov al tikra ra. He says, on the other hand, the Gemara uses a phrase that if you have an opportunity to do something good, why not do it? And therefore, v'im lo yo'il lo yazik, and it wouldn't hurt. In other words, his point is, I'm not doing any harm by saying it for the 12th month. Of course, I should be done lekaf schus, but on the other hand, it doesn't hurt. I'm not doing anything negative. And we have a precedent for this, that Eov used to offer karbanos on a daily basis for his sons, because he knew that they used to like to carouse a bit. But he didn't know that every day they were carousing and partying. But on the possibility that maybe my sons may have done something inappropriate, he used to bring karbanos for his sons. So you see that it's not inappropriate to act as a precaution on behalf of someone that you don't know is a bad person, but it doesn't hurt, couldn't hurt. So why not? Why not say Kaddish for the 12th month? So you see this equivocation. On the one hand, give him the benefit of the doubt. On the other hand, okay, give him the benefit of the doubt, but it doesn't hurt to say Kaddish for 12 months, so what's the big deal? So just go ahead and do it. Okay, two sides. So what does he say? V'hinei yedidi hagon Rav Anshel Schreiber, I don't know what this abbreviation stands for. Depo ha'ir, Depo, he says of our community, He'ir osimi masha kosav amogin avram v'taz, shalolomar tikose v'seichoseim rak b'layla harishona. He says, he pointed out to me that we know that on Rosh Hashanah, you wish a person ksiva v'chasima tova, l'shana tova tikose v'seichoseim, right? But you're only supposed to extend that blessing to a person on the first night of Rosh Hashanah. Shetzarach lahachsik es chaveru l'tzadik. That you have to assume, you're obligated to assume that he's a tzaddik. So you're not even allowed to, even though it doesn't hurt, you're not even allowed to give him offer him a bracha that might help him in the event that he hasn't had a good chasima yet. But you're obligated to assume that a person is so righteous that he already has gotten the chasima by the end of the first night of Rosh Hashanah. And that's why you're not allowed to say tikaseh v'seichas, you just say gemar chasima tova. From then onwards, right? Because a tzaddik is a person who has the ksiva v'chasima already the first immediately upon the entry of Rosh Hashanah. So you see from the practice of Rosh Hashanah that even though you could argue it wouldn't hurt, but nevertheless, yes, it would hurt. And perhaps, just perhaps, even though he doesn't say this explicitly, we can hearken back to the statement of Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef, who had said that words do count in Shemayim. That by portraying the person as a good person by stopping to say Kaddish, we're actually triggering something in Shemayim. Maybe that's what's going on here. But he says no. V'yesh l'chalek. But perhaps you could say it's different on Rosh Hashanah. Desham havi kemefaresh shehu eino tzadik. she'adayin lo nechtam l'chaim. He says because by giving a person a proactive blessing of tekoseh v'seichosem on the first day of Rosh Hashanah or the second night of Rosh Hashanah, for example, then you're actively portraying that person as a person who hasn't yet gotten the chasima. Whereas by saying Kaddish, it's not an explicit declaration that the person needs extra time in Gehenna. But and then he says, and let's go a little bit further. Even if for someone who's not my parent, I have a right to say Kaddish for 12 months, then I have another question. What if the person who hires me to say Kaddish for them is a son or a daughter of the decedent? Then I am acting as their surrogate. And as such, v'nira misvara achar desachiru uba bischaro mepekudas ushlichus habanim havi ki'ilu heim ba'atzmam pagu upagmu b'chabad avoisam. He says, then it would seem that since you're coming as a surrogate for the child, then it would be an act of disgracing a parent by saying Kaddish on behalf of the daughter. Let's say the man left only daughters, and you've been appointed as their shaliach to say Kaddish. So then taka, it could be that there's a necessity to say Kaddish only for 11 months because you're acting as their shaliach. And this is the line where I think that Rav Greenwald said that if you're saying it for someone else because the person didn't have children, you're saying it on behalf of a child, that's why you'd only say it 11 months. Ve'af lefi ma shekasav hataz Deminias Kaddish b'chodesh Yud Beis Nachon Mishum Shehu b'Shevi Al Taiseh. So he says, even according to the Taz, who says that not saying Kaddish in the 12 months is a proper practice because you're doing something passive. You're not doing actively. You're not actively doing something wrong. You're maybe only passively denying them the protection. In Cain, hu hadin b'tashlumin la'acher. That same argument would apply to someone else. Okay. Ve'ein lahakshus l'divrei Taz. The mehai time omer hareini kaparas mishkavo b'chodesh Yud Beis. So that you could ask a question according to the Taz. That what is a person's... The Taz says that's not saying Kaddish during the 12th month is only sanctionable because you're just not doing something. You're not actively saying that the person doesn't need Gehenna anymore. You're just passively not reciting Kaddish. But what about the following? We know that during the first 12 months of a person's patira, a person is supposed to say about a parent, Hareini kaparas mishkavo. I should hereby atone for his death. Because a person during the first 12 months needs a kapara. Up to the first 12 months, because he's still in Gehenna. So the question then is, what do you say about a parent during the 12th month? According to the Taz, the only reason for not saying Kaddish in the 12th month is because it's a passive act. But what about when you have to say something? You either have to say Zichrono Livracha, which is after the first year, or within the first year you say Hareini Kaparas Mishkavo, because they're still getting atoned for. So according to the Taz, then it would not be okay to say Hareini Kaparas Mishkavo in the 12th month. Because that's a kumase, that you're actively saying something that implies that they need the extra judgment in Gehenna. So what right would you have to say Zichron Livracha? You're sort of stuck. You can't actively say something that implies that they're being judged in Gehenna, but you also can't say Zichron Livracha because maybe they still need a kapara. Da'adayin lo zacha, and therefore because maybe Zichron Livracha is sheker, maybe his Zichron was not Livracha because he's still burning in Gehenna. So therefore, what you're stuck. What are you supposed to do? He says, "In Cain ech yomar lechavero tikase v'seichasem la'alter lechayim shemora shehu tzadik." And maybe, therefore, according to the Taz's argument, that the only reason why it's legitimate not to say Kaddish, even when you don't know what the status of your parent is because it's b'sheiv al taisa, it's a passive act. You're not actively saying something that may be false. What right do we have to say tikase v'seichasem la'alter? That you should immediately be written and inscribed if maybe the guy's not a tzaddik. V'shemahu sheker ve'ech omer b'halayla harishona. How can you therefore tell a person you should be immediately be inscribed and sealed in the book of life when maybe this person is not deserving of that? Yesh lomer dahasam shiny. but there that's different. De omro derech baracha, because you're extending a blessing to a person. You're not making a declaration that he will be inscribed and sealed immediately for life, but you're giving him a bracha that Hashem, I hope that Hashem views you as a tzaddik amor. It's a wish. It's my wish. Va'o dehasam b'chaim kaminan ve'ein rasha muchlat. Da'harei kaimalan ha'mekadesh al manas shani tzaddik amor afilu hu rasha gomer chayshin shemehir b'tshuva b'libo. Another distinction, he says, is that there's a distinction between the living and the dead. The dead don't have the opportunity to do tshuva. And so therefore, you always, you have to, there's more of a reason to be choshesh that you're saying sheker if you say that someone is a tzaddik when he's not, after he died when he wasn't a tzaddik, or vice versa. But when it comes to extending a bracha to someone on the night of Rosh Hashanah, they're still alive. And like we have a halacha that if a person offers kiddushin to a woman, and he says, Hareyat mikudeshes li al manas shani tzaddik, you are hereby betrothed to me on the condition that I'm a tzaddik. So is she mikudeshes or not? What if the guy's not a tzaddik? So the Gemara says you're choishesh for kiddushin. You have to be machmir and assume that she is married misafek, because maybe he was mahar b'tshuva. So even if you know a person is not a tzaddik, you can still give him the bracha of tikaseh v'seichasim la'alter l'chaim tovim u'l'shalom, because maybe right now they're being mahar b'tshuva. Okay, v'im kein shaper yesh makom levarcho sheyashuv v'yizhav tzaddik v'yechasim miyad b'sifran shel tzadikim gemurim ma she'en kein b'meisim de'en shuvasim mo'eles. He says, but that's only for the living. But for the dead, that's not going to help. By the way, okay, so then he goes on to, he says, Al Derech Agada. He says Rosh Hashanah is a different genre altogether. That Rosh Hashanah is a time where it's not permitted to even say anything which would be indicative of your friend not being a complete tzaddik. That you have to actually portray every single yid as a tzaddik, because Rosh Hashanah is a time when every person is being measured very, very carefully. And so he goes on, we won't go through the whole tshuva, but it's just a fascinating idea. It's very, very worthwhile to look over this tshuva right before Rosh Hashanah. It's like a ben adam lechavero kind of ethical drasha, a gadata, on why it's important to extend people a bracha, because since every person is being judged, you can help their judgment by extending them a blessing of goodness predicated on their being a tzaddik. That actually, like Rav Yitzchak Yosef said, will trigger some goodly divine judgment. So the Tzitz Eliezer has a very interesting tshuva about what the reason for this minhag of not staying in during the first year for Yizkar. And in the course of that discussion, he says that these two reasons will chapa nafkamina as far as whether or not it will have to do with as far as whether or not to say Kaddish for 12 months for somebody else or not. And so, but he says that there are two possible reasons that he brings from a sefer. He says because during the first year, a person is in Gehenna, and so they're working on their own self-redemption, and so you're not able to say Yizkor for them because they're still undergoing judgment. And he says, in other words, like he says in the previous paragraph, he says, Inyan ha'haskarahu k'dei sheyizkor osam elokim, va'agav kain yizkor osanu imohem letova bizchusam. So why do we say Yizkor? May God remember my righteous ancestor, my righteous parent, and also in their zechus, he should remember me as well. So it's not appropriate to make that prayer during the first year because they're still struggling for their own survival in Gehenna. So you don't want to say a prayer, God, in the zechus of my parent, remember me too. Let them save themselves, so to speak. Let them save their own souls during the first year without my trying to get their zechuyos during the first year. That's reason number one for not saying Yizkor the first year. Reason number two, he says, because a person is so distraught during the first year that it'll cause a bittul of Simchas Yom Tov, and therefore during the first year we tell a person, no, it's too painful, it's too fresh, the wounds, so don't stay inside for Yizkor. So if those are the two reasons, and by the way, he ends up discounting both reasons, this is Eliezer. He advocates that a person should say Yizkar during the first year as well. But incidentally, he also points out that the two reasons will be a nafkamina lahalacha, as far as, and this is the second to last paragraph, he says, V'imkein yesh od nafkamina bein beis hatomim hamurim v'hu b'nogea l'chodesh hayud beis. Im habonim tzrichim kvar lahaskir kishizechal be'echad mehamoadim shemaskirim haskaras neshamos bebeis hakneses. If it's, let's say, your 12th month of the year of Avelis, should you say Yizkar or not, since you've already stopped saying Kaddish? So he says like this, Uvakan yotze lahefech. Dilatam harishon tzrichim kein lahaskir kvar kedei delo l'shavya osam rishoyim. He says, if the reason is because I shouldn't stay inside because my parent is still struggling in Gehenim, but if it's the 12th month, I don't want to portray my parent that's still struggling for their life, for their soul in Gehenim, so therefore I should stay inside and say Yizkar during the 12th month. But he says, but according to the second reason, which is that it's too painful, you're too distraught, the wounds are still too fresh, Chazal say that it takes a full 12 months to forget about the pain of the decedent. And so therefore, according to the second reason, you shouldn't stay in. And therefore you're still going to have a problem of the Isser of Avelos. So bottom line is that it could be that if the Yontif, you're saying Yizkar falls out in the 12th month, a lot of this discussion that we've been saying about Kaddish will be relevant for whether or not you say Yizkar. But as I say, it's proper to stay inside for Yizkar during the whole year, and certainly during the 12th month as well. Anyway, any questions or comments?
Well, sometimes a lot of yeshivas collect money from people who say Kaddish for people who don't, either not religious or whatever. So what's their minute to say it's 12 months or not?
I can't tell you with first-hand knowledge, but I assume that it's 11 months. I assume it's 11 months, yeah.
But wasn't there a debate about it? If he's saying it for the child of somebody, then he's a shliach.
Right, if he's a shliach, then he would have to say it for 11 months, yeah. If he's not a shliach for the child, but let's say a person died without children and his other heirs,
yeah,
then it could be a nafkamina, yeah.
Since she would get paid for it, it's
right, right.
Yes. Are there levels even in Olam Haba?
Sure.
So Sharm, for example, he says that there are many levels.
Yeah, the Medrash portrays 7 levels.
Yeah, so
7 levels of the afterlife. Yeah.
When you're saying that, maybe it doesn't mean that you're not to the Gehenna necessarily. It just means I'm trying to improve your level in Olam Haba.
Shama should have an aliyah.
Yeah, to have an aliyah.
Shama have an aliyah.
Right.
But Kaparas Mishkavo, yeah. Kaparas Mishkavo, yeah, you're right. But Rav Leiter implies Harini Kaparas Mishkavo means I'm trying to get him out of Gehenna. Yeah, but you want to argue that Harini Kaparas Mishkavo may just mean to try and get him an extra aliyah in Gan Eden. And he's already out of Gehenna. Could be. It's a good argument. Okay.